I'll mention it. Do your recording.
Good morning. Welcome. Happy New Year, everyone. Just wanted to again say that the University of Michigan is excited to be here yet again with a Wolverine Caucus Forum sponsored by the UM alumni.
Oh, wait, they can't hear you. Who's controlling the volume here? We're good. You can hear me? Yeah. Good.
I better stand over here then. Is that better? Yeah. Welcome again to the Wolverine Caucus of 2018. It was this month 25 years ago that the first Wolverine Caucus breakfast was held at what used to be the City Club. Does anyone here remember the City Club? Yeah. So please help me congratulate the Wolverine Caucus today. Now, the Wolverine Caucus is co-sponsored by the UM Alumni Association and the Office of the Vice President for Government Relations. We like to think that we're helping to change the world one forum at a time. So we thank you for being here today to hear an illustrious speaker that I know who has changed the way we think about finances in Michigan for the last at least 30 years. We're excited that he's here today, and to introduce him more formally is our own State Representative Adam Zemke from Ann Arbor. Go blue?
Blue.
All right, and so without further ado, State Representative Adam Zemke from District 55. Thank you.
Many of you know me, I'm a proud Spartan alum, actually. So I am. Dr. Fulton didn't know that until now. But the University of Michigan really is a true gem in terms of a research engine for the state of Michigan and a huge economic impact. I know it's debated every once in a while as to who the state's largest employer is, but the University of Michigan is right at the top of that list, always, if it's either the #1 or #2 spot. And you know, the idea around discussing the state's budget and revenue is something that I think is particularly appropriate because we just had the Consensus Revenue Estimating Conference. And I do want to give a couple of shout outs. I saw a couple of legislators in the room, one of which is a good friend from and represents a portion of the one of the other campuses of the University of Michigan. Representative Ferris from Flint is here and is very active on the appropriations committee. And then I saw Representative Maturin as well. He may have stepped down. But you know, it's always fun and interesting to listen to the different topics of a Wolverine Forum. This is one I think is particularly interesting and very timely. You know, revenue estimations and costs of state-funded programs, the choices that we've made and priorities that we put forward are going to come to a forefront in the next several years. And so talking a little bit about what that means from a research perspective is going to be very interesting. And it's always nice, you know, Representative Robbie and I split the city of Ann Arbor, and I feel like he gets a lot of his constituents up here. But it's always nice to have one of ours from the other area of Ann Arbor that is represented. And so, Dr. Fulton, without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to you. I think we've got a great presentation. I do want to, just for a housekeeping perspective, we have tried and are not successful from a technology standpoint to make this any bigger. So if you have trouble seeing, please come forward. You know, the front of the bus is not a scary place. And so without further ado, we're going to turn over to Dr. George Fulton. Thank you so much for coming.
Can you hear me? Yes. Yeah, that's too bad. Well, good morning. You know, when I try to dissuade my students from using drugs and alcohol, I advise them that if they wait a few years and stand up too quickly, they'll achieve the same effect, which I've just done. But I'm okay. Well, thank you very much, Adam. Adam is actually my state representative, and I appreciate very much the newsletters he sends out periodically, and he keeps me up to date on what's going on in Ann Arbor. So, Adam, thank you for that. So I'm delighted to be here. It's actually great to see several old friends in the room. It's like presenting to family, but I hope you're not as critical as my family. Veronica Johnson and Cynthia Wilbanks have been very supportive of me in my long career at the University of Michigan, and we've become good friends as well as colleagues. And this is also true of Steve Grafton, the CEO of the U of M Alumni Association, who's a good friend of mine. So I'm pleased to present at their event today. To explain my surprise at such a large attendance today, before talking to you about 2045 AD, and Adam, I'm going to be more in 2045 than 2018, but before I talk about 2045 AD, I'm going to go back to 64 AD, during the reign of Nero. And at that time, they also had gatherings at lunch, as we do here, but what they did is they had gatherings in large arenas, and it was largely to see gladiators fight lions. And on this particular day, everyone was very excited because the best gladiator in the land, he was ranked #1, was to face the fiercest lion. And so they met at Center Arena, and this lion was so fierce that after a couple of minutes, he wrestled the gladiator down, put a big paw in his chest, and was leaning over to start consuming him. When the gladiator whispered something in his ear, the lion immediately stopped, got up, walked to another part of the arena, sat down, frozen. Gladiator got up, brushed himself off, and was leaving the arena when Nero intercepted him and said, "Say, I'm curious, you just got to tell me what you said to that lion." And the gladiator said, "Oh yeah, well what I told him was as soon as he finished his lunch, there would be a speaker on the economy." So to validate the lion, today I'm going to speak on the long run prospects for the Michigan economy, extending out 30 years to 2045, and I'm going to put particular attention to considering the demographic outlook. So I'm going to focus more on this today than what's going on right now. The results you are about to see are a product of a major project and report sponsored by the Michigan Department of Transportation and completed last year, and I wanted to acknowledge their support here. Also, I'd like to recognize my co-conspirator in this study, Don Grimes. I'm not solely to blame for all the information you're about to see. And finally, I'd like to thank my wife for her tolerance of the long hours away from home to prepare such studies as this. We got together about a year ago, and we decided in order to support the Buy Local initiative and also to solidify our relationship, every week that we were in town, we would go out to a local restaurant. And I'm pleased to tell you today that we have met that vow. I go out on Friday nights, and she goes out on Tuesday nights. I do want to stress at the outset that even though this is a study on Michigan, many of the findings are just as pertinent to other regions of the United States. So now to the study. I'm going to focus on our forecasts of population and of employment, both for the state as a whole, as well as a briefer mention on the county profile. And out of these numbers, I'm going to suggest 5 lessons that we believe are critical to planning for the long run, as well as identifying policy issues suggested by these lessons. So I'm going to start with a background slide on the forecast. As I mentioned, this forecast is in partnership with the Michigan Department of Transportation, and it's the product of the Regional Economic Models, or REMI, Economic and Demographic Forecasting and Simulation Model, the forecasting expertise of the University of Michigan economists, and comments and insights of a number of local metropolitan planning organizations and regional planning organizations. Now, before discussing the details of my economic talk, I'm going to let me start with an anecdote on economics in general. I will get serious soon, don't worry. A colleague of mine was walking down a country road a couple of months ago, and he encountered the hills that were covered with sheep. And he stopped to admire them at the fence, and the shepherd came up to him to see what he was up to. And my colleague said, $100 versus one of your sheep, that I can estimate how many sheep you have. Well, the sheep herder he was looking all around, and all he could see was sheep everywhere, and he said, "You're on." My colleague said, "You have 847 sheep." And the shepherd said, "Wow, I don't know how you did that, but I'm a man of my word, so take one of my sheep and be on your way." So my colleague surveyed the herd for about 5 minutes, finally picked up an animal, tucked him under his arm, and was walking down the road, and he heard the shepherd running after him. Shepherd catches up and says, "Double or nothing, I can guess your occupation." My colleague says, "You're on." He said, "You're an academic economist." And my colleague says, "Wow, I don't know how you did that." And the shepherd says, "Put down my dog and I'll explain it to you." Okay, with that introduction, let's get serious. And I'm going to start by asking a fundamental question. And that is, where will the supply of workers come from to meet an increase in overall demand? Now, I'm not talking about firm B stealing a worker from firm A. What I'm talking about is when we need an increase in demand overall. Where does that come from? Well, one source is from the unemployed. A second source would be from an increase in the labor force participation rate. And a third source would be from an increase in the working age population. Now, those are the only possibilities. This is not a theory, this is arithmetic, okay? So if over the longer term, unemployment and the labor force participation rate settled in at fairly stable rates, which is a common long-run economic assumption, increased supply would need to come largely from an increase in the working age population, either by residents aging into the category or from net in-migration. So the question for us is, how promising is this? Well, let's go to my demographic forecast and take a look. So I'm going to start by showing you our forecasts of population for Michigan. I'm going to talk briefly about population growth, and then I'm going to talk about population change by component, and also population distribution by age group. Okay, first, population growth. The data that you see here to 2015 are current Census Bureau estimates, and it's followed by our forecast through 2045. So you can see after the hit surrounding the Great Recession, there it is, we start growing again. Population began growing again in 2012, and then by 2021, it gets back to our peak, which was 2004, and by 2045 we reach 10.7 million. I want to point out that our forecast says that we'll meet the governor's target of 10 million residents by 2020. Okay, a little more detail. Growth in the United States after 2015 will only be about half its rate from 1990 to 2000. So the blue bars are the United States. Here's 1990 to 2000. Growth of 1.2% per year, and that's data. And then you can see post-2015, we're in the 0.6% neighborhood. And population in the state post-2015 will be weaker than that, growing about 0.25% per year for the next 30 years. And here we are in the last two magenta bars there, okay? So the question is, what underlies this slow growth in Michigan's population post-2015? And our answer lies in the components of population. Now, if your attention span for presentations like this one is limited to 3 slides, the next 3 slides are for you. Starting with the components of population change in Michigan. So I have put the bars up in the first panel, which is 1990 to 2000. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go period by period through this, then I'm going to backtrack, and then I'm going to go component by component. So, to define what you're looking at, using 1990 as example, the blue bars represent net domestic migration. The magenta bars are net international migration. The green bars are natural change in population, that's births minus deaths, and the red bars are total population, and the red bar is exactly the sum of the first 3 bars. Okay? So following a decent decade of the 90s, we see the downturn in population in the first decade of this century. You'll notice that the red bar is now negative. And that reflects large declines in net domestic migration with the dismal economy and slowing natural growth. 2010 to 2015, we're still in data here. We see improvement in this period. The red bar is now positive again. And that's due to smaller declines in net domestic migration. Okay, then we go to 2015 to 2030. Again, overall improvements. The red bar is now taller. And that's due to improvements in net migration, both domestic and international. And then we have the 2030 to the 2045 period. And again, you see some slowdown in population. The red bar is shorter, and that's due to almost no contribution from natural growth. I don't know if some of you in the room could even see, there's the green bar just poking above 0. Okay? So now I'm just going to backtrack for a minute, and I'm going to get back to that, obviously. First, the blue bars. We see continuing declines in net domestic migration, but at slowing rates over time. The magenta bars. We project modest positive increases in net international migration over time. Without international migration, Michigan's population would be shrinking at an accelerating pace after 2035, which would lead to a weaker employment profile as well. And then the green bars. We expect a severe slowdown in natural change over time. In fact, by 2039, the number of deaths each year exceeds the number of births. So what's behind this natural growth story? Well, let's take a look. So behind many of the trends I'm showing you today is the dramatic aging of the population over the next 30 years. This is also the case for the country as a whole, but Michigan also has a greater proportion of baby boomers today. So on this slide, I'm showing you population change by age group in Michigan from 2015 to 2045. From 2015 to 2045, the 65 and older cohort, these last two bars, will gain 877,000 residents. While the less than 65 cohort will shrink by 109,000 residents, and that's the sum of these first three bars. Another cut is shown in this slide. Today, 15.9% of the state's population is 65 or older. And that's the sum of these last two blue bars, which represents 2015. So about 16%, or about 1 in 6. By 2045, 22.9% of Michigan's residents will be 65 or older. And that's the sum of the last two magenta bars. Okay, and that's about 23%, or about 1 in 4. So we're moving from a situation of about 1 in 6 today to about 1 in 4 by 2045. Compare this with the situation in Florida today. In the state known as God's waiting room, 19.4% of its residents are 65 or older, about 1 in 5 now. The relatively low rate of immigration of young adults and the aging of a disproportionately large share of the population into the typical retirement years puts increasing strain on the supply of available labor. So now permit me to recap the first three lessons suggested by the data to this point. First, lesson 1, the dramatic aging of the population over the next 30 years as the baby boomer generation enters the typical retirement years. And it's already started, okay? Aging is a fundamental factor shaping the economy of the future. In Michigan, the share of the population aged 65 and older is forecast to increase from less than 1 in 6 people now to approaching 1 in 4 by 2045. A fundamental question for the event today is, what form does planning take in supporting and sustaining an elder-friendly community? Well, what are retirees looking for? Well, I fished around and I found actually this informal survey that had a retiree wish list. And so that wish list includes 1, warm climate, such as today. 2, proximity to water. 3, access to good health care. 4, cultural activities. 5, recreational activities. 6, good restaurants. And 7, elder-friendly housing. So I posed the question, how many of these items can we provide in Michigan? I claim that we are providing, or have the capability of providing, all of the items 2 through 7. If any of you think we should add number 1 as well, I'll discuss that with you outside the building after the presentation. Lesson 2, labor shortages and productivity. Largely due to the dramatic aging of the population, a looming problem down the road is labor shortages, particularly of workers with skills that mesh with the evolving and information-based economy. The support of a high productivity economy will be incumbent to address the growth restrictions of a more slowly expanding workforce, advances in technology included. But there are also losers in such an economy in the short run. Particularly vulnerable are occupations with routine tasks that can be automated. People behaving like robots replaced by robots behaving like people. One case of special interest is truck driver. truck driver is the leading occupation in 7 states and could eventually fall victim to autonomous trucks for delivering goods and services. Roger Penske is already making plans to prepare for this, according to a recent news article. Also, Pizza Hut has unveiled plans to launch a fleet of driverless delivery vans. It's too early to know what such displacement could look like, including the potential for new job creation. Well, as I look over across the room here, it appears to me that none of you were around when the first cars shared the road with the horse. But I was there, and believe me, it was a very, very stressful time. Lesson 3, immigration. There will be a continuing reliance on net international immigration to fill out workforce needs. Without international migration, Michigan's population would be shrinking at an accelerating pace after 2035. Relatively low in-migration rates for young adults put a cap on the state's ability to expand, and that would be compounded by any legislation that significantly limits the number of documents to be issued for immigration into the United States. So what draws migrants into the state? Well, one is employment opportunities, and that's perhaps the strongest magnet. 2 is educational opportunities, at least I'd like to think so. 3 is quality of life, for example, cost of living. And 4 is family ties. One of my colleagues says he thinks that's the strongest magnet. Okay, now let's go to my forecast of employment for Michigan. I'm going to talk about total employment briefly, and I'm going to spend most of my time talking about employment by industry division. Demographic trends will have an important influence on economic trends. We see trend employment based on the Bureau of Economic Analysis measure to grow positively but modestly over the forecast period. Slower growth than we're projecting for the United States because of slower population growth. Now, of course, the future path of total employment is the net result of the outlooks for the industries that make up the state economy. And there's also, of course, a wide variation in the performance of the constituent major sectors. Now, I'm sure a lot of you cannot see my industry tags on the x-axis back there, and even the ones that can see them might not know how to interpret them, so let me go through this briefly. This is the change in employment in Michigan for 2015 to 2045, and it's the percentage change per year. Leading the pack is private education and health services. And almost 90% of this category, by the way, is health services. Number 2 is administrative support or business support services. 3rd is what I call the knowledge economy. That includes information, finance, professional services, corporate headquarters. Okay? And the 4th bar here is leisure and hospitality services. Now, all 4 of those sectors grow at above average rates over the next 30 years. And let me put this yellow line on that has the average growth to validate that. Now the other categories. Bar number 5 is construction. 6 is other service providing industries. This one's government. And the last one here is trade, transportation, and utilities except retail. So that's things like wholesale trade, transportation, public utilities, warehousing. Okay, there are 3 bars left on this graph. The first of these 3 is a composite of, is a composite of farming, mining, natural resources, forestry, fisheries, all of those industries. The second one is retail trade, and the last one is manufacturing. I want you to, all 3 of those lose jobs over the next 30 years. I want you to note, though, that output in this last group of industries could continue to increase, but changes in technology, productivity, and consumer preferences will cause them to lose jobs over the long run. This is the case in the high productivity manufacturing sector, where output increases from 2015 to 2045, despite the shrinkage in employment. I also want you to note that much of the pre-production workers in research and development, engineering functions, design functions, they're all categorized in this third bar by the national data organizations. So in that third bar are included what you might call white-collar manufacturing, which obviously includes white-collar auto as well. Retail trade is already feeling the employment pinch, with downsizing announced the past several months by a number of name retailers, with more to come. Brick and mortar retail employment is impeded by, one, the growth in internet shopping, what has been termed clicks versus bricks. Two, evolving labor-saving technology, for example, self-service checkouts. And three, the trend towards less labor-intensive warehouse clubs. As with manufacturing, output in retail also increases over the period. Indeed, retail employment declines more slowly from 2015 to 2045 than it did from 2000 to 2015, and output increases more rapidly with stronger productivity growth. At the other end of the job growth spectrum is, of course, one, health services, which will benefit from the aging of the population. Two, the more highly skilled professional services, the next two bars, and then tourist-related employment in the fourth bar. So now's the opportune time for me to recap lesson 4 on employment. We see the strongest job growth over the next 30 years in 3 areas. One, healthcare, particularly with the dramatic aging of the population. 2, knowledge and information-based professional service and support industries. That's a trend that we're seeing right now and that continues well beyond the current economy. And then 3, leisure and hospitality services, again propelled by the demands of a rapidly growing senior population. I'm going to take 1 minute just to talk about our forecast of income, because income is another important dimension of Michigan's economic profile. We've become accustomed to measuring economic success by job growth. In fact, inflation-adjusted personal income per capita is generally regarded by economists as the best single measure of economic well-being for a region. Despite our outlook for continuing improvement in Michigan's personal income profile moving forward, we see the state continuing to lag the United States in the level of income per capita. So on this slide, this shows you the level of Michigan income per capita relative to the level of U.S. personal income per capita. So on the y-axis where you see 100%, that means Michigan's personal income per capita level is the same as the United States personal income level per capita. Okay. In 1999, where are we here? There. Personal income per capita in Michigan slightly exceeded the U.S. level. And then it began to deteriorate sharply. Hello. By 2009, the measure was only 86% of the U.S. average. I have given testimony to the Michigan legislature on the Michigan economy 2 times a year since 1992 and provided reports 4 times a year. So in 2009, I was there, the Michigan legislature, giving testimony and telling them about this. And I can remember distinctly driving home after that and my wife greeting me at the door, and she said, "I have news." And I said, I am so depressed about the Michigan economy that unless you can put a positive spin on it, don't even tell me. And she said, okay, the airbags in my car work. Then you can see that the state began to recover. But at least through 2045, we're forecasting that the measure will remain at least 5 percentage points below the U.S. average. And that's the legacy of the first decade of this century. Okay, I don't know where you're all from here. I think I know where a lot of you are from. I'm going to mention briefly the population and employment outlooks for the counties of Michigan. And they can be best summarized by the following maps. Don't worry, I'm not going to go county by county. The first map will show you the change in population by Michigan County 2015 to 2045. Those counties forecast to grow more rapidly in population than the statewide average are indicated in green. Then we have the counties with growing population, but less rapid than the statewide average, shown in yellow. 26 counties will see declines in population, and those are shown in red. And I think you all know we have 83 counties, and you also know, you can also locate every county on this map by name, but in case you can't, I'll be a little more specific in a minute. But first I want to go to the change in employment by Michigan County from 2015 to 2045. And I have a second map also that I'll show you. 51 counties are forecast to gain jobs over the next 30 years, the green and the yellow combined. 32 counties lose jobs, indicated in red. And again, I'm going to review these patterns shortly. This next map shows the counties where job growth is the strongest over the next 30 years, or greater than 150% of the statewide average. That's a high bar. And there they are. And I'll mention them too. Let's consider the geographic variation to be less than 5, which can be recapped as followed. Michigan is not a single economy, even though we talk about it as if it is, but instead it's a collection of economies with widely varying demographic and economic profiles. Much of the variation reflects the differing age structures of the local population, as well as disparate economic trends. In general, the most favorable outlook is for counties with a large share of employment in industries with the best growth prospects, accompanied by supporting growth in their working age population. I'll also mention, I also want to add that some of the weakest prospects are in rural counties, due in large part to an older population and a lower proportion of high growth industries. Okay, summarizing population growth by county. The fastest growing counties are clustered in counties with a major college or university relative to their total population. Washtenaw, that's one for you, Adam. That's of course got U of M and EMU. Kalamazoo College, Western. Ingham, MSU, a lot of U. And Isabella, no, Ottawa first, that's Grand Valley State. Isabella, Central Michigan, and Mecosta, which is where Ferris State is. Also the tourist-oriented and retiree-friendly northwestern Lower Peninsula, including the Traverse City area. Kent, Livingston, Eaton, and Luce counties. 26 counties see declines in population concentrated in the rural western Upper Peninsula, the area along the shores of Lake Huron, and Bay, Saginaw, and Genesee counties. Now to summarize the employment growth by county. 51 of Michigan's counties gain jobs over the next 30 years, but at a relatively modest pace. The most rapid job growth occurs in the high educational attainment suburban Detroit counties, Washtenaw, Livingston, and Oakland. Kent, Ottawa, and Allegan counties in western Michigan. Grand Traverse County in the northwest, and Isabella County in central Michigan. Again, that's central Michigan. Okay, this supervised sleep period is almost over. I have been accused throughout my career of not standing for anything, and that's simply not true. I do stand for anything. So in that light, the policy issues suggested by the 5 lessons include: 1, assessing the role of planning in supporting and sustaining an elder-friendly community. 2, dealing with the looming problem of labor shortages. 3, recognizing the contribution of immigrants to fill out workforce needs. 4, supporting a higher productivity economy while recognizing the losers in such an economy. 5, investing in a more highly skilled and educated workforce. 6, retaining greater numbers of our higher income retirees. And 7, recognizing that different geographic regions have different assets. Well, our forecast and the underlying data suggest that Michigan has its challenges, but also has assets to succeed. We believe that it will. Thank you, good night, and good luck. Am I the moderator too? Okay, no question.
I have a question. I appreciate you doing this presentation and hope that I can get this online somewhere or get transportation to send it up to me. As a parent or grandparent, looking forward to the future, and what we are doing right now in Michigan, which is trying to push more people into trades and so forth, but yet you're showing that really it is the higher educational attainment jobs that is going to have the growth in the future, wage growth and everything else. So as a parent or grandparent, where would you push your child? If you were able to push a child in a direction, Dr. Fulton, where would you push that child?
I have 2 children, and I pushed one into healthcare, and I pushed the other one. I didn't push her. She pushed against me, and now she's in urban planning, but she's doing that in Detroit, and it's a wonderful opportunity for her. And she works on the park systems that goes to the recreation stuff. I think that in this time and day, having better opportunities in the trade professions makes sense. If I'm looking further down, if I'm looking way down the road, I'm thinking, my guess is that the focus of the school systems are going to change somewhat because of the changing economy. We're talking about, machines replacing people, AI, all of those things. So I suspect that in the future there's going to be a lot more emphasis on data sciences, because I think that's where a lot of the action is going to be. Now, if your grandchild doesn't like data sciences, I wouldn't push them into it.
She's 11 months.
Well, there you go. I landed in economics because the physics was too much for me. Well, I won't talk about the other end. I ended up in economics, and I never thought I would, by the way. Yes?
I wonder about changing the definition of working age, if that's part of the equation.
Yes,
In
and
terms of on the upper end.
that's a very insightful question. You might say, well, people now are, we're using 65 here in my graphics. You saw the largest increase in the post 85, which is encouraging to me. But you might say that people are working longer these days. these years. I mean, people don't necessarily retire at 65, don't necessarily retire at 70. They're working a lot longer. So maybe on your study, if you had accounted for some of that, it wouldn't have looked quite like this. Well, we did account for that. In fact, we made assumptions that older people would be working at higher rates in the future. We put that into this. And if I were to critique our study, I'm wondering if we might have gone a little bit too far on that. So in that case, I stand by, but I agree, 65 is kind of an artificial, Social Security says 66 now. At the university, 70 is usually the spot where they start trying to kick you out. So I'm glad you came today. You might not see me in a while. Is there yes?
I get concerned with the growth of all the healthcare and the other aspects of manufacturing decline. Is there any worry about how we're going to pay for all that healthcare?
Yeah, where's Adam? Our priorities are going to be changing. The world is changing at an incredibly rapid rate, and so when our priorities change, our budget priorities change as well. And I think when I said that we were losing employment in manufacturing, I meant first the manufacturing that's the blue collar in the factory manufacturing, but we're still going to turn out more output than we do now. And so it's just that we'll need fewer workers to do so. Buddha Fidel. She was in my class in the 1980s, right? Yeah, well, the thing that always the 90s. Okay, what I think about is all these students I had, and they've all gone on to much more successful careers, and I'm still here. And my answer is I attribute your success to my class.
Well, I think you should. It was a wonderful class, by the way.
Well, thank you. She got an A, so.
No, it was very challenging and wonderful. I was wondering about one of your slides where you showed the per capita income,
Yes.
the income per capita
Yes.
in Michigan lower than the national average over the next 30 years or so. And I'm wondering who's driving up the average nationally? I mean, who are those states that are at 100%?
Well, I haven't done the other states,
Oh.
so.
Well, I mean, there's an average there for.
Yeah, well, the rich get richer,
Okay.
So I'm guessing that, yeah.
Connecticut's highest.
Connecticut is what I was going to say, yes.
Okay.
So if you want one example, there you go. You wonder about the North Dakotas of the world too. They're small, but they.
That they're driving, okay,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yes, sir.
Along the same lines though, you did show, so here we are, back in 2000, when we were at the national average,
Yeah.
17 million cars sold,
Yeah,
autos
yeah,
doing
yeah.
really good. Auto economy doing great now, we're still in the dumps.
Well, we've greatly improved.
Well, from 76 to 88 is not that great, but if we go up to 90, what do you see driving the numbers in a positive direction going forward?
Well, I guess I'm more bullish about the Michigan economy as we are coming out of the recession. I think we have assets. One of the assets I'd like to think is our higher education system. We've got a lot of, I think, smart people coming out of that, including all of you in the room. The Great Lakes is a tremendous asset if we're interested in retaining higher income retirees and also tourism. I think we have a fairly skilled workforce, and so I think we can get there. Our model says we can get there, the stuff that's feeding into it says we can get there. But of course, we can screw it up too. And so that's part of why we have these discussions. So I don't know if that's a complete answer to your question, but I think we're strong in some areas where we're doing very well in the white-collar auto industry. A lot of focus on the blue collar, you know, and a lot of the technology here. The thing is that it won't be spread evenly throughout the state, as you saw. Yes, ma'am.
You mentioned that in migration, to help reinforce our workforce would be a necessity. And then one of the, if I remember correctly, one of your policy suggestions had to do with increasing international migration to the state. But do you have any thoughts on increasing domestic migration into the state? Like some thoughts, I know there's a push to try to keep the brain drain, the great people who go to colleges here from taking their talent away, and there's several reasons why. But what can we do to attract people to the state?
Yeah, no, I'm totally supportive of increasing the domestic migration, and as I showed you in my graph, over time our sense is that we'll be losing people net, but smaller and smaller, and you know what they want. I put it, they want, you know, the better the employment opportunities for them. Here is a big one. Once you establish family cohorts and that's very helpful. Quality of life. You know, the reason I put the cost of living example up is with people, oh, how can we compete with quality of life as some of these places on the coast and all that? Well, cost of living is one place we can. My daughter knows someone who's in urban planning in San Francisco. She wants to come back to Detroit because she's tired of making a good income and being poor. And so that's attracting her and the opportunities there. So I guess I was more focused on international because it's a more upfront policy issue, as you know. Are there any other? Yes, sir.
It's hard to predict everything, so.
Yeah, it's hard to predict anything. That's but I made a career out of it, so.
Right. So what do you see as right now at least, some of the things that could throw off the predictions? You know, a black swan or maybe a white swan that would send things in a positive way. But that, you know, it's hard to build into the assumptions because it's unknown.
Well, first us. I mean, we can, as I said a few minutes ago, we can't screw things up. We can do the wrong things, and we can keep doing them. And there are other states out there that have also figured out what the right things to do are. So it's competitive, and we've got to be competitive. So I think that's the main thing. And so that's why, I mean, the policy things I listed are not things you go out and okay, we're going to write a law today and we're going to do something. They were meant to be guidelines for us so that we can move forward in a sensible way, knowing what's down the road, or at least thinking we know what's down the road. Yes, sir.
How much is the policy of the leaders of a state influential in the economy versus the national economy as a whole? I.e., how much of the growth since the Great Recession can be contributed to our leadership in the state over the last 7 years versus the national economy as a whole?
Some of it can. The national economy is more crucial in that, but I got to be careful here. I'm in Lansing. You know, politicians do like to take credit for positive things and dismiss negative things. And they do deserve some of the credit. Maybe not, sometimes not, maybe not quite as much as they claim. But we're really, you know, the national economy is just critical for, just absolutely critical. If they tank, we're going to really struggle not to tank. Is there anything else? Yes, sir. George.
I'm reminded of Yogi Berra's comment that predictions are hard to make, especially about the future. But you just kind of just mentioned the word agriculture. I mean, it still is quite a significant chunk of our state's economy.
Yeah.
Is that pretty much going to be stable or growing? Obviously, the number of farm workers probably will decline for increasing automation.
Right. Yes. The number of farm workers, I think, surely will decline. But farming is an important part of the Michigan economy, and will continue to be so. I mean, we have to feed these people, and so yes, I'm sorry I was a little more dismissive of that industry, but yes, it's still important, and we're national and world leaders in some of the crops we grow. Is there anything more? Kathy, because I feel that she was a longtime reporter at the Consensus Revenue Estimating Conference. She always asked me a question. It was always, I'll put you on the spot, it was always a good one.
Okay. What happens with NAFTA, and how does that affect Michigan's economy going forward?
Yeah. That's a little more of a current issue. I guess we have looked at NAFTA. My comment is, and I could be totally naive, I tend to be an optimistic person, but I think when we're all done with this, we'll be just nibbling around the edges on the NAFTA and not making a large change. If that's not the case, we could even benefit a little bit from the protection. The concern, of course, is if it turns out to be nasty with retaliatory trade restrictions, that's a problem for this state. Yeah. I should say, if you want to get our most recent short-run Michigan study, we have a few pages on NAFTA, and we presented that last week actually, and didn't get too much pushback on it. So we're either right or people don't know. People don't know. Is there any? Yes. Oh, I'll take you and then you.
Just looking at all the rural areas and the agricultural land, now that we're starting to give state licenses for growing marijuana. Now that's just for the medical marijuana community, but has there been any, what you were presenting today, estimating what some of the impacts about the growth of the medical marijuana and overall marijuana if the state legalizes recreational use? Is that expected to have any kind of a overall economic impact?
Yeah, it is not included in our study, and I don't have a carefully thought out answer for you, so I'm going to defer. Yes.
Getting back to sort of the national discussions about sort of the policies that have been predicated on sort of a 3% growth rate or something like that, which we haven't really realized, and perhaps it's unrealistic. What trends are you seeing towards more sustainable, especially when you see this aging population? How are we going to sustain, or what kinds of things can we do to sustain enough economic support to keep that population from, I mean, we've got investments and other things, retirement investments, but as you point out, it tanks for some of that investment stability is predicated again on this idea of this 3% growth or something, which is perhaps not a realistic expectation.
I think that's a little optimistic to answer your first question. I don't have a sort of a detail. I just think, I think what's important from this point of view is to be aware of where we're going and be very thoughtful about doing the right things. And the one thing I'm absolutely confident about is this aging thing is going to happen. You know, sometimes when we present economic forecasts that, you know, maybe not, we do testing and different analyses, but on this one I don't need to. Okay, we're just going to get older. Yes, sir.
I just have a quick observation about employment in healthcare.
Yes.
It's already the biggest employer in many communities. If you look at Crane's Detroit business
Yes.
and the list of employers in Detroit, 5 or 6 of the top are healthcare. There's Detroit Medical Center, Henry Ford Hospital. It's remarkable how much healthcare is driving employment in many places. Even Traverse City, I think Munson is probably the biggest employer.
Yeah, and it's very stable in that, you know, that line that went down like this from 2000 to 2009. There was only one major sector in Michigan that did not lose jobs over those 10 years, and that was healthcare. And that's remarkable that it withstood that. Is there anything else? Any compliments? Thank you.
You know, every year the University of Michigan takes a group of faculty around the state, about 30 faculty around the state. It's called the Michigan Road Scholar Tour. And we had the pleasure in 2017 of Dr. George Fulton joining us on the tour. And we stopped at points all around the Lower Peninsula and several in the Upper Peninsula. And every place we stopped, the question was, oh my God, we heard that George Fulton's on the bus. What's going to happen in our community? So he's famous around the state, he's famous nationally, and we thank you so much that you took time today to come to Lansing on a snowy day, although I tell people it's 80 out. And on behalf of the Alumni Association, the Wolverine Caucus of the Office of Vice President for Government Relations, I want to give you this gold Wolverine Caucus pen as a note of our appreciation. And thank you again for joining us today.
Thank you again very much for coming. Happy trails.
And we will see you again on February 20th when we're talking about poverty initiatives in Michigan. Thank you. Very nice to meet you.
No, that's fine.
All about
The third try.
Oh, right, that was first.
You danced around. This is what I'm saying.
you live in Minnesota. Number say, it's a bad idea.